Good evening, everybody. How are we? Welcome to our webinar, and welcome to the first one that we've done in 2025. It's exciting. It's a new subject. It's quite novel, and we're looking forward to the next hour. My name's Phil Anderton. I'm the CEO of ADHD 360. And I'm joined tonight by a new face to many of you, a fantastic lady, fantastic researcher who's now feeling the pressure just because of the words I've just used. Natasha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and really such an honour to be invited. So thank you. So I'm Natasha Scott. So there might be some people on the call that I know. I have a background in healthcare. So I've been in healthcare for 20 years. And I thought it'd just be useful just to give a little bit of a background really to me. So my background in the NHS is not a traditional route. So very much kind of joined the NHS at 17 and worked in the NHS for 20 years. So very much a very experiential background really, sort of building my way up through the ranks, as it were. So through general management, then into kind of more sort of strategic transformation lead roles. And most recently, up until the summer last year, I was working in mental health as a system convener across one of our ICBs. So my interest really has always been in kind of transformation, QI, OD, policy, and I've worked at national system and provider levels across the healthcare system. Just let you move. Academically, so as I said, I joined the NHS at 17 and didn't go to university, but I gained my MSc and other professional qualifications whilst working in the NHS and most recently executive and ADHD coaching. Probably the most important things for this call. So I'm a mother. I have 2 small children. I'm a wife. And I'm also a late diagnosed female ADHD, so very much kind of driven by a passion to really sort of improve the healthcare landscape in this area. And my own lived experience, my own journey to get into my diagnosis, and in particular some of the challenges I faced in my professional life, really have kind of driven that passion for designing systems that are more inclusive for people and that really sort of focus on helping everybody, no matter kind of what their challenges are, but sort of that really kind of that inclusive by default approach. And so now I'm a healthcare consultant, so obviously did some work with yourselves and researching, and I also coach neurodivergent senior leaders to really sort of harness their strengths and thrive in their organisations, and helping organisations as well to really kind of create those inclusive environments for their teams.
So what you've said to me there, Natasha, is you've got lived experience. You've gone through this. You're going through a great career, but you've had your struggles with undiagnosed ADHD and being a woman with undiagnosed ADHD as well. But what we've done here together is undertake a piece of research on the hidden costs of not treating ADHD, which, when you and I met to commission this piece of work, was driven by the need to have UK-based data that can be thrown at anybody who's in the nurse sayer community that says it's too expensive, there's no need to do this, there is no gain by looking and treating ADHD, which we, and I presume a high percentage of people joining us on the webinar are very aware of. But we wanted to prove it with research, hard facts, hard numbers, and that's what we're here to do. Now, that said, how did you enjoy the piece of work? And I've used that word carefully, enjoy. There's my first pebble in the pond. How was this piece of work?
So I loved doing this. I mean, as it probably comes across really clearly, not only do I have that lived experience of ADHD, but it is such an area that I'm passionate about, particularly because in my 2 decades in the NHS, I am so used to working in services that are not set up to be inclusive and to cater to everybody. And I think one of the things that really kind of came through for me with this piece of research is that there's a lot of stigma around ADHD, autism, neurodivergence in general. And I think there's also quite a lot of fear. I think people, they don't know what they don't know. And when people don't know what they don't know, it scares them because it's an unknown. I think one of the big challenges is that actually, as the NHS as a whole, and actually this is something that I've really found in my 2 decades working there, we aren't the best at capturing data. So when you talk about that kind of that hard data and those facts, it's really hard to get a true picture of what that looks like. And I'm really lucky that over the past 10 years in particular, I've worked with some incredible population health colleagues in the public health sector. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that we can make assumptions around what the landscape looks like going forward, but we don't have those knowns. And actually, if the pandemic is anything to go by, the potential crisis that we could be facing with this could be bigger than even we've been able to research and predict with this piece of work. So I think, to briefly answer your question, sorry, because I waffled there, but I think what I would say about this piece of work is it was really interesting. In terms of the case studies that I did with people, whilst I have my own lived experience of what my journey was to get that diagnosis, the individuals that I interviewed, the honesty, the authenticity that they shared with me, it was such a privilege to be in that position that they felt they could trust me to be able to share their story and to do it justice. And I think, we interviewed 5 people. We could have interviewed 500, and their experiences would have had lots of commonality and lots of themes that would have come through. The struggles for people with ADHD and undiagnosed ADHD in particular are real. And I think there's a lot of, like I said, negative stigma out there about, people jumping on bandwagons, and sickfluencers are kind of encouraging people to go and get diagnosed. If you've not walked a day in somebody's shoes that has undiagnosed ADHD, you cannot possibly know what that struggle is like. And it is real. And I think that's what I really hope that this paper will actually be able to land for people, and to give them that validation and that respect and that space to feel like they belong. Because as much as we think we're all quite unique and different with our ADHD, when you find other people that have had a similar experience to you, it can be really quite healing to sort of be in that space where you feel like other people understand your struggles.
Yeah. So in answer to the question, how's it been doing this piece of work? What I'm going to play back to you there is, you've enjoyed it. It's been illuminating. I think also it's validated your own life experience, hearing in detail other people's life experiences, and you've confirmed the hypothesis, the view that ADHD treatment has to be taken seriously, and we can't carry on accepting some national statements that this is a fad, this is just something that people will grow out of, and why have so many more people now got ADHD? I put my words into it, but that's what I think we find ourselves in a position as a consequence of this. Now let's look at some hard numbers to set a tone, shall we? That the paper which we're releasing like formally today. I'm going to read out some of the numbers that we found here. And we go bullet by bullet through a couple of bullets, Natasha, to give reference points for everybody. And like I say, the paper's available. And we've got a call to action note for everybody, which will be available through the website. And the call to action note has these details in them. And it also amplifies the recent ADHD UK communication about payment caps, which we'll talk about later. So these numbers are going to be available to you. But to get the discussion going, the total economic cost of undiagnosed ADHD is now estimated at 6.5 billion to 11 billion over the next 2 years. So it's going to cost the NHS up to £11 billion if they do not treat ADHD over the next decade. And in saying that, we know that that's easy to cast aside, isn't it, Natasha, and say, yeah, but what would it actually cost? If that's what it's going to cost us of not treating it, make the business case for treating ADHD. And one of the things that you were able to distill out of all of the available research and your own work is the return on the investment of ADHD treatments. So if we spend £1 treating somebody for ADHD, we get some significant numbers back, don't we, in terms of that ROI? Do you want to talk about the ROI piece for a second? Because I think that gives patients and their families genuine reason to actually champion for what they deserve, because it's not going to be a cost to society, it's going to be a saving to society as identified through that ROI. So do you want to just take us through the ROI piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 11.2 billion that you quoted there, that's the total economic cost. The healthcare part of that is 1.3 to 5.78. And so if we look at that total economic cost, that is because we'll have co-occurring mental health challenges with people with undiagnosed ADHD. There's associated social care costs. There's an education impact, particularly for younger people, but also older or younger adults that are sort of at university. We've got that lost productivity cost, and we've also got a huge amount of criminal justice costs. So there's stats around the impact of people that are within prisons that have undiagnosed ADHD. And I've been really fortunate, and I know that's your background as well, to talk to some of our serving officers that have a lot of real insight into that, and in particular that kind of the landscape that we're dealing with. In terms of that ROI, so what I was able to work out, and this is very much kind of assumption cost based on sort of data that was available. So we're looking at approximately £7,800 to treat one person over 3 years. So that's to assess them, diagnose them, and then treat them over a 3-year period. So if you then extrapolate that to around about 15,000 people per year, what we're looking at is that £4 to £16 for every £1 spent. So for 15,000 people, it's going to cost us 117 million, which is it's a big number. But if you base that on the fact that for one person, it's 7,800, and we know the numbers that we've got waiting, we've got 196,000 minimum on our waiting list. We have about 2.25 million people in the population that are thought to have ADHD. And obviously, there's a huge percentage of those that haven't even explored it yet. So that ROI, that £1 that we spend, we will get somewhere in the region of £4 over 3 years back for every pound spent, up to 16 times that £1 investment, which gives us that 1.92 billion potential saving over a 10-year period. The cost with that is if we just do nothing, we are going to spend that 6.5 to 11.2 billion total, and that's 6 billion in healthcare. So the option to do nothing is not an option. There is a huge cost with doing nothing. So economically, this makes sense to do. It makes sense to take this seriously and to support people.
It absolutely does. Now, what we've got to do, there's a lot of numbers in there, and there'll be a lot of people on the webinar who haven't followed all those numbers with crystal clarity. So let's just go back to, you're sat in front of your GP. Yeah. You're saying, I want an assessment because I believe this screening says that I'm likely to have ADHD. My life struggles are saying I may well have ADHD. My impairment and my symptoms are indicative of having ADHD for myself or my child or someone that's significant to me. Oh, it's very expensive. We can't have the NHS spending that money. Here's a paper that says, with absolute clarity, it's going to cost you at least 4 times as much, possibly 16 times as much in the NHS system if you do not treat me for my ADHD. That's what we're saying, isn't it? That's our strapline. That's our headline, eye-catching content. And I think one of the things we talked about when we originally said we'd do this piece of work was we want to enable people to have that strong discussion, that strong argument with their healthcare provider, and be able to challenge and be able to say, I deserve this. And financially, you can't and should not refuse it. Would that be a fair synopsis of where we are? Absolutely,
yeah. And I think, so if I think about my own journey of going to kind of approach my GP about getting a diagnosis, I was almost kind of told, well, there's no point because you're going to sit on a waiting list for so many years. And I know so many of, for example, my coaching clients, friends, people that I've kind of come across since working in the ADHD community, there is that same misconception that, well, you don't fit the typical profile. Because if we really look at it, that typical profile and stereotype of the naughty little schoolboy that won't sit still, well, firstly, that is not the presentation for females. It's also not the presentation for males in general. So yes, it is a proportion of young boys that perhaps do present like that, but on the whole, that is not the typical presentation. So we have to get away from those stereotypes and start to actually understand what, what does that presentation look like? How does it vary? And there's like a meme that says, if you've met one ADHD person, you've met one ADHD person. And it's so true. Everybody has a very different way of presenting. And I think being told you don't fit the stereotype when you go to the person that is supposed to help you is really damaging, and actually then potentially has that impact of causing additional mental health challenge. It takes a lot to go to your GP with the stigma that surrounds neurodivergence to say, actually, do you know what? I think you go and you say, there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. Your brain just works differently. And actually plucking up the courage to go to your GP and have that conversation takes real courage. So to be kind of then dismissed or, kind of laughed out of the door is really damaging. And it is hard because our primary care colleagues are under enormous pressure, and there is still so much unknown about this. But that's where I think, we are fortunate to have experts in this field, that we really need to build that, that kind of awareness of what it means. And I think there's some incredible people in the space doing it. ADHD 360 is one of those. We have to listen to what people are saying and what that actually looks like.
There's a couple of great questions I'm going to pick up here before we move on to some things that I think we need to discuss. There's a question here saying, where's the extra money coming from in the NHS? Now, we need to be very, very clear. This is not a need for extra money. These people that are, you guys who are not treated for your ADHD, are costing the NHS this money anyway. What this offers, effective treatment, offers a considerable saving, and maybe that's the way we need to flick that message for a second, is there is going to be a necessity for, and I was talking to GPs this afternoon, how do we treat the non-responsive depression and anxiety in adults that keep coming back into my GP surgery? That's a cost. How do we treat the child that's run out in front of a car and gone to A&E? That's a cost. How do we actually cope with the medication budget for things that are manifesting that we don't understand, when actually they'll be reduced if we treat the ADHD? That's a cost. The diabetes rate in people with ADHD is much, much higher than the norm in society. That's a cost. We know that people with untreated and poorly managed ADHD live a shorter lifespan than somebody who is treated effectively with their ADHD. Nobody gets to that point of sadly passing away without an additional set of costs. So this isn't a plea for extra money for the NHS. What this actually is a huge dollop of common sense that says, do this and do it properly, and this will save you many, many millions of pounds. And there's absolute clarity on how the numbers pan out with that, isn't it, Natasha?
Absolutely. And I think that to come back to your point there, when it's not about asking for extra money, it's asking for the money that we currently spend as tax-paying individuals to be spent in the right way. So having the role that I did within a mental health provider was that I supported our chief operating officer with managing crisis and flow. So many of the people that we have coming into secondary care mental health hospitals potentially have undiagnosed neurodivergence. And the challenge is, if you are an individual with undiagnosed and untreated ADHD that doesn't have a secondary care mental health need, your route in is the same. You are referred on the traditional NHS pathways, you're referred to the mental health hospital. And that is the reason for the wait, because rightly, those secondary care organisations are dealing with those people in crisis and those people that need psychiatric intervention and psychiatric intensive care. To sit, for example, with myself, to sit on an NHS waiting list into a mental health provider, a secondary care mental health provider, does not make sense. All we do then is we create a bottleneck. So for me, it's about actually how do we change those pathways? And I'm really fortunate that I've had such amazing experiences to work with people that are really kind of helping to change this, not just in mental health, but across the broader spectrum of healthcare. And that's absolutely what I've been doing the last 10 years is how do we make sure that the pathways and people coming into secondary care are appropriate? So like you say, those people coming into A&E that could be avoided, that could be prevented, how do we make sure our pathways are set up to get them to the right place quickly so that they get that support that they need earlier. So you talked about diabetes there. We manage diabetes really poorly in this country. So what we see is people having all these comorbid conditions because we don't get to them in time. And it's the same with neurodivergence. We don't get to people in time. So that increases their risk of, for example, substance misuse. It increases risky behaviour. They're more likely to get into trouble with the law and end up finding themselves, having criminal records or being incarcerated. If we deal with this problem early and we focus on preventing this becoming a bigger challenge, that's where the money comes from, because we move it downstream. We spend that money earlier in somebody's pathway to give them the best possible opportunity to achieve their own success and their own ambitions. And that's what this is about. It's about spending the money that we have, that finite amount of money that we have, in the right way, and reducing that inefficiency, reducing that waste that we have in our system.
There's some great stuff in the chat here, and as we sort of get punchy with our answers to the questions to keep us being able to get through the agenda of the guys who've joined us, it's really interesting to look at them. There's somebody posted on here, the railway companies are making a fortune out of me because I keep losing and forgetting my railway tickets and having to buy a new one. And that may sound glib, and it may sound like something that's a throwaway line, but actually, if you haven't, and none of us have got the cash to just throw away on expensive train tickets, if that's happening regularly, but we can change that, then we can make a difference.
Parking ticket, that's the same.
Parking ticket and unpaid fines.
Exactly, yeah.
And this is real. These are real life struggles, mail and post, that doesn't get answered. So we discuss with kind of evidence base from the research, and there was a question about how did we do the research, and that is in the paper. The evidence base is there for the NHS to wake up and actually start to listen, that by treating people with ADHD effectively, this will save you money out of your budget. This is not an additional cost, it's a reduction in the costs and the finances required. But there's also that other spin on things, and that is the impact on domestic finances and the costs to individuals within their own home. And that kind of, excuse me, that segues for me into looking at the case studies that we decided to publish. Can you just talk a second about how you went about those case studies with those individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so obviously knowing that they had ADHD and knowing myself what it's like to be ADHD and to be interviewed, that can cause stress and anxiety in itself. So we pulled together, it was a semi-structured interview approach. So shared the questions with the individuals in advance so that everybody had the same questioning, the same kind of line of inquiry. We made sure that they had that in advance. We anonymized all of the information that's come through to protect give them that anonymity. But very much it was open questions that enabled them to tell their story and to feel heard, and to do that in a way that they were able to feel safe, validated, and like it mattered. And I think that is one of the big challenges in this scenario, is that very often what happens is, you're kind of rushed through a GP room, 5 minutes. You depending on kind of where you get your assessment from, it can be very impersonal, almost robotic in some instances. So really kind of giving these individuals that ability to tell their story in a way that it potentially will influence what ADHD services look like in the future was really critical. I'm just going to skip through. I have got the case study summaries in front of me. I just wanted to pull out a few common themes that came through.
Let me pose a question to you rather than looking through the paper. That's you striving for excellence. Let's just park that for a second. Let's talk about the lady that worked with children. That was a case study that we're both very aware of. And as you say, we've anonymized, and we strive really hard to anonymize these case studies. If we start with her for a second, what change did treatment make for her that might have an economic impact? We can talk about how we get people to lead their best lives and all of that kind of, that's a separate webinar. This one's about economic crisis and the economic saving. So how did treatment change her life?
So I think there were some practical things that she said, which everybody shared, which was around that kind of improved focus, that validation, that self-esteem, productivity, improving her work-life balance. I think for her in particular, some of the challenges that she really faced was that just that ability to actually get out of bed and function in the morning, because she wasn't having active treatment, and she found ways to manage her ADHD in the best way that she possibly could. That's very kind of common in those high pressured environments. I think some of the other things that came through were the impact it had on relationships, both from marital relationships to familial relationships, relationship with children. There's a lot of things that when you're triggered, when you're struggling, when you're overwhelmed, burnt out, you can't cope as well. And it's not a case of, or just kind of get on with it. Everybody's busy, everybody's stressed. It was a case of she physically could not get her brain to do the things that it needed to do. And she got to a point of desperation and feeling like she didn't have any hope.
And where does that fit? Go back to the economics, to the economics of her domestic scenario.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that she is now in better engaged employment.
Yeah.
And happy in engaged employment and at a professional level, and bringing home the bacon for her family in a much happier way. Is that a fair way of putting the change
Absolutely.
for her?
Yeah, she said she'd always had in her head what her career path would look like, and when she got there, for the first year or two, actually she really thrived. But then the pressure of that environment that she was in, and the fact that she didn't have the help that she needed, she really struggled. So then she struggled to hold down a job, and then that impacted on her ability to obviously have money coming into her home. It impacted on her relationship with her husband. So all of those things, had we not have support, had ADHD 360 not have supported her, she would have been unemployed. She may have gotten herself into trouble with the law, because she was potentially at risk of doing more risky behaviours. It would have impacted on her ability to kind of support her family. And all of those things have an economic but also a real personal cost. She also potentially would have been misdiagnosed with all sorts of mental health challenges, because she got to a place, by her own admission, where she felt desperate. She felt like she didn't know how to get out of that scenario. And we know that people with ADHD are more likely to try and commit suicide, or to sort of go down the route of self-harm. And that's a tragedy. That is such a tragedy, because all of those things are preventable. And to look at her now and to hear her story of where she is now, that is because she got the right assessment, diagnosis and treatment that has enabled her to really thrive. So yeah, I think that hopefully that helps. And I think, that was true of almost all of the case studies, real sort of extremes, but everybody felt very much the same.
If I dive into case study 2, as it is labelled in the report for that anonymity, I'll give you a second to find it. We talk about at the end of the case study here for this chap, the key challenges were emotional distress from the undiagnosed ADHD, difficulties with focus and organisation, leading to an inconsistent career progression, and the associated relationship strain. When we look at inconsistent inconsistent career paths, what are we talking about there, and what's the impact of that?
So I think it's widely known that people with ADHD, we seek that dopamine hit. We kind of seek that reward. We're very interest driven rather than importance driven, which can be challenging in some professional environments. I think this chap in particular sort of said that he kind of knew how to do his job, but actually kind of got into quite a lot of conflict with colleagues at work, because he didn't necessarily work in the same way as they did, and that caused tension. And he shared a story of one day where actually he would have almost got to the point that something would have happened that potentially he would have found himself in legal trouble. And thankfully that didn't happen. A colleague saw what was happening before it happened and almost kind of stopped that. But again, I think it's that impulsivity that comes with having ADHD, that we kind of really strive for perfection, for excellence, to do the right thing, to be quite righteous, and to follow the rules, and that can lead to conflict and tension if other people are not sort of living up to that expectation that we judge ourselves on. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, the way that somebody with ADHD will kind of think or feel, but to kind of be misunderstood, or to kind of be accused of doing things that you're not, or to kind of have people really sort of not understand how you work, leads to tension and conflict between individuals. And that's kind of on a professional level, but also it does sort of play out into those marital relationships, or those romantic relationships, or family relationships. So I think that was kind of the sort of pathway that he went down. What was really interesting is the amount of people that sort of within these case studies that actually found self-employment to be far more beneficial for them, because they were able to work in environments that they were really driven by their interest and the things that really kind of light their fire, if you like. And I think that was quite common. And I know that obviously there is a higher proportion of people that are entrepreneurial that are diagnosed with ADHD.
I don't think, as someone that's neurotypical, despite all the work we do here, I would ever understand how it feels to be a square peg in someone else's roundly defined hole. And you're right. And there's more work we're doing with the entrepreneurs and ADHD. And for those of you who follow us on LinkedIn and other platforms, we're sponsoring a major award for entrepreneurs who are neurodivergent, which will go through the summer into November time. I'm just picking up some of the chat again, if I can, for a second. A lot of people are sort of talking about more general things for a second, and I think it's good to just go into those. You know, there is a challenge to what I'm about to say, and we will talk about that. But you do have the right to choose. If you're in England, you do have the right to choose a provider for your ADHD assessment, a diagnosis of relevance and treatment, and that will be funded by the NHS. There is no doubt about that. That is your legal right, called the right to choose, and you have the right to that. Now, tonight's not mainly about that, but I do want to make, because a lot of people have asked, I do want to make that very clear. You do have the right to choose. Now, to get forward and ahead of something, there is a current proposal by NHS England, and I'm not going to make this webinar about this, but I do want you all to be aware. There is a current proposal that each of the 42 commissioning bodies can cap how much they spend on an organisation, not on a patient, on an organisation, to £100,000 a year. So that would take it down to about 46, 47 patients a year per commissioning body would receive treatment for ADHD by us, for instance. Currently, we get 4,000 referrals a month, and the current proposition by NHS England is to reduce that to a minuscule amount and undo all the hard work that champions and people like ourselves in ADHD UK and ADIS have put forward in the past to get people access to services that they deserve. Now, there is a call for action on ADHD UK's website, and we will be joining that campaign with evidence from this paper and this webinar, which the team will get up on the website tomorrow. The call for action is for anybody who thinks this is abhorrent, this is inappropriate, to write to your MP and let them know. The struggle that I'm here in Manchester at a major NHS conference at the moment, and it's very clear that the people don't know what the shape of the dog is, never mind if the dog's going to wag its tail or the tail's going to wag the dog. And we're not sure if the politicians are going to run the NHS, or if NHS England's going to run the NHS, or the local commissioners are going to run the NHS. One thing's for certain is the patients need to be bloody well listened to. And here's an opportunity to actually strike out and strike at the heart of an inappropriate change and make your MP aware, so we can go down the corridor to West Streeting and say, you're not on, fella, this needs to not happen. And I'm sorry to put that in blunt language, but I actually do genuinely believe that's what needs to happen. Now let's go back to the agenda that we're here for a second. And we talk about, and many of our patients in the case studies, and I'm going to go in a second just to warm you up. I'm going to go to case study 5, Natasha. We talk with many of our patients, and there are questions about this as we transition back to the research outcomes. the links between mental health and physical health. We call it ADHD below the neck, and there's a paper about that on our website. And I was speaking today about that at this conference. If people with ADHD are going to be mentally poorly, have mental ill health, better words, because of their ADHD not being treated, that will inevitably lead to one of, if not more than one of many conditions that are almost predictable. Carrying excess weight because there's a poor diet, no planning of a diet, lack of shopping healthily, lack of eating healthily will lead to excess weight. A sedentary lifestyle leads to chronic heart issues, diabetes, and other connected illnesses and risks of things like a stroke. And I'm not here to scaremonger anybody, but the data is there, the facts are there, and we can change that. We've got other people talking in the chat about skin complaints. And of course, any skin complaint is exasperated if your diet is poor and not healthy. And the inability to plan and execute your healthy living plan is endemic within ADHD, and that's something we can change. And it's my hope that within this year we can find the time as an organisation to take our from the couch to the park run plan forward and try and get patients off the couch and every Saturday undertaking the park run as part of an exercise and healthy living program that we can sponsor and we can generate some energy around. Now, Natasha, when you were talking to patients as part of this research, that correlation to physical health beyond the ADHD symptoms as classically defined as inattention, hyperactivity and impulsivity. What was the discussions around the general group about overall health and well-being, do you think?
So I think I would say it was quite mixed. I mean, we as ADHDers, we are great at hyper-focusing. So if you put your hyper-focus into something that is going to have a positive impact on your physical health, great. One of the case studies was somebody that really had kind of got into CrossFit. And so almost kind of to the point of obsession and hyper-focus. So if he wasn't able to do his CrossFit, it massively impacted on him. And that is something that I've seen in some of the coaching clients that I've worked with, is that whilst in terms of kind of task paralysis at work and things like that, they really struggle, actually they do their exercise every single day, and that is their dopamine hit, that's their reward, that's their thing that they really hyper focus on doing. You mentioned patient 5, and I think for her it was, like you say, it was that kind of physical manifestation of that undiagnosed ADHD as well. But she was somebody that, I mean, every single one of them was just, like I said, such a privilege to talk to. With her, really listening to the impact that it had on her social life as a child. I mean, she wasn't that old either, and sort of had been kind of really misunderstood and sort of almost sort of put down in her education. She referred, and I mentioned it in here, they, as children, they were told that they could only have the pudding, which was the fun stuff within lessons, if they got the main course done. And she always struggled with that. She really struggled with that, and later on was diagnosed with dyslexia. And it was only when she was diagnosed with dyslexia that somebody mentioned to her ADHD. So not only had she had undiagnosed ADHD throughout her education, she also had undiagnosed ADHD. So actually, you know, as she kind of then started to understand herself, she understood why she struggled so much. And what that's enabled her to do is it's helped with the treatment, has helped to alleviate some of her physical challenges. It's improved her social life. She actually mentioned as well how it's really given her that insight to understand her children better and advocate for them better, so that they don't have the same struggles and the same challenges that she had when she was younger. So I think that's one of the challenges. We talk a lot about generational trauma, but that is one of these things that the landscape is changing, and we're getting more information. And what that means is that as parents, we're able to recognise those things in our own children and hopefully break those kind of preconceived societal norms that mean our children end up just kind of going down routes that are not necessarily the right routes. We get them that help earlier that they need. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it's really interesting you brought the generational thing in here, and yet again I found myself on the end of a phone today to a parent who was wanting to talk through. They found my number somehow and rang me, and I try and shield myself from those thousands of calls these days, and it's almost impossible. And they were asking me questions about their daughter, and their daughter seeking a possible assessment and diagnosis for ADHD. And one of the questions I asked the dad was, how would you describe your daughter at the moment if you were to describe her physically? And he said, well, she's carrying a fair bit of weight. And I said, and do you think that's caused by diet? He said it was absolutely caused by diet, but we cannot stop her getting a McDonald's, a Kentucky, whatever it is she's getting, and that's what makes her tick at the moment. That's what she's doing. And there was a whole piece on the radio earlier in the week about the dopamine hit of inappropriate foods, sugary foods, the unhealthy foods that of course the fast food chains will try and defend is not unhealthy, but we all damn well know it is. And it is almost impossible for a parent where you've got that generational link going on in the household, where you can see your child starting to build up an unhealthy relationship with food, for that dopamine pattern, which goes then into adulthood, that dopamine fix, that need, and we've got to get away from that, and treatment does get us away from that. But if it's generational, it gets even harder to break that cycle. And there was somebody in the chat who said, and it's an interesting comment, and I love some of the comments that challenge us, and this one challenged me, and it said, yeah, that's all well and good, but a healthy diet and a healthy lifestyle costs money.
Yeah.
Well, actually, when you look at it in the round, I'm sorry, I'm going to challenge you back. This is doable. We've gone through a process of working with patients and saying, so how much do you spend on fast food in a week? And when they tot it up and look at their bank statement or whatever it is where they get their evidence from to answer that question, if we can change that pattern, we can save them money. Even if they're buying their medication privately, it becomes cost effective. Getting off the couch, especially as the light evenings are coming now, and going for a couple of miles of a walk of an evening is free. And that will help a lifestyle. So I will push and I will defend the statement that healthy living and healthy lifestyle is going to help. And it is and can be affordable. But the thing is, you're not going to get on top of it unless you've got treatments. You're not going to get on top of it unless you actually fully understand what you've got to do. And there's a whole series of our previous webinars on ADHD and diet and ADHD on nutrition. And I would ask anybody who's inquisitive about that to have a look at those. Very similar format to this. But please don't feel that this can't be done because of cost, because it absolutely can be done and you can get there. And I would love to be supporting you to get on that journey and move things forward. And as Natasha said, the evidence of talking to patients, our patients, about lifestyle is very clear that without the additional help of an assessment, a diagnosis, treatment, to be able to organise things and get on top of things and break cycles like a dopamine fixing cycle, a dopaminergic hit becomes addictive. We all know that. So we've got to break that cycle. And to go back to the theme of the paper, this is about the economic cost and the damage of that economic cost to both the domestic home, but also the community and society as a whole. And it's there. And overweight patients is a problem for an ADHD community, and we need to change that. And we need to move on in the debate beyond ADHD being seen as a very expensive mental health disorder and actually see it as a public health concern. And that's where some of the incredible costs are going to lie in terms of who's going to be funding those. Now, I want to go into the skills and competence of our case study people now, Natasha, if I can, because I know from working with you and reading the paper time and time again, as we saw the iterations, one of the things that we got to hear about was the increase in competence, self-belief, and then confidence, competence, self-belief, and confidence that allowed individuals to give more, do more, both at work and at home, and therefore support the national economy more, if you will, in terms of their ability to perform happier, more content at work. How did that pan out for you as the interviewer?
I think, like I said before, I think it was just that case of people not feeling that they were able to reach their potential because there were barriers, real or perceived. You know, we know that with ADHD, rejection sensitivity is a huge challenge. And I think that came through with actually all of them, the males and the females that I interviewed. I think there's again a kind of common misconception that it's just females that really struggle with rejection, perceived or real. It's not that imposter syndrome, that inner chimp feel that we talked about earlier on in the week. It's real for everybody, not just women. And I think what really kind of came through for me strongly was that getting that validation and really starting to understand that there's not something wrong with you. Your brain is just wired differently. You don't have a deficit of attention. Your attention is perfectly fine when it's things you're interested in. Your deficit comes when it's things that are not your natural skill set, you're not your natural competence, or you're being pushed to do things in a way that doesn't fit with your brain. It's that really kind of creates those challenges and increases that rejection sensitivity. And I think what each individual really was able to demonstrate is that being seen, heard and treated and supported, whether that's counselling, medication, coaching, whatever that looks like, that validation and that support for them enabled them to feel better equipped to deal with some of those challenges because they had strategies in place, or they had the medication to help them with the focus and to help them reduce the distraction. And I think that for me was really, really strong. And like I said, actually, a couple of them are self-employed and have found that actually they are thriving in that self-employment world because they're doing stuff that they're truly interested in. Equally, those of us that are in employed roles, we thrive in spaces where we are applauded and enabled to reach our full potential. And I think one of the other things that came through really clearly for me, and it's something that I've explored quite a lot in coaching sessions with individuals, is as ADHDers, yes, we have a role to play in understanding our brains properly and developing strategies to cope. But our employers also have a role to enable the environments around us to be inclusive. And that is one of the big challenges. So you look at the drive to kind of push everybody back to the office 5 days a week, and I'm sure there'll be lots of debate and things in the chat around this. But actually, when we think about COVID and that kind of more flexible approach to working, what that did was enable people to feel that they had better work-life balance. They were able to better care for families, which obviously then contributes to the economy going forward. Now, a lot of those things are kind of reverting backwards, and it's causing a lot of challenge and harm for people. And people with neurodivergence can put in for reasonable adjustments, and there's loads of information on your website, there's loads of information on the ADHD UK website for how to ask for those reasonable adjustments, that flexible working approach. Those should be standard. And if you look at somebody like Anna Whitehouse, who really kind of pushed the flexible working bill to go through, those things should be standard for people to have those options, because that does help to contribute better to the economy. So not only does it help people with neurodivergence to really thrive, it helps everybody.
It does, and there is some interesting comments here about people struggling to go back and work in an office, and as an employer of 320, 330 people now, we recognise that about a third of our staff are neurodivergent, and this year we've really upped our game, and perhaps a little bit late to the party as an employer, but we have upped our game massively. And we have quiet pods now in each of the offices where people can just go and sit, close the door, and it's silent. It's a soundproof booth to go and sit and work in. And we've appointed, to those of you who follow us on social media, we've appointed Amy Polly as our wellbeing and funfulness lead for our staff and for our workforce who do come into the office. And actually what we find is, if we make it a neurodivergent sensitive place for people to work, they can come into work, be fully functional and actually enjoy it. It's when you don't provide those things. And excitingly for us, and there'll be a social media release on Monday, Tanya Bardsley, who's a TV personality that we do some work with, is coming to open the first sound booth that we ever got. We're a bit late to opening it. It's been open for a couple of months. She's coming to formally open it because it was in discussion with her that we decided that we would go and do this. So we're opening that in respect of Tanya, who's got a great message. So there's an awful lot of good things, and all of those things lead to economic strength. They don't lead to an economic burden and a deficit. I sit here as an employer, I feel it's a privilege to employ people who are neurodivergent. So why would I not make some accommodations that make their life easier and make them enjoy work, or allow them to enjoy work? It is, I think it's a fundamental privilege, not a cost burden, to be able to do that and to be able to provide that. So those of you, excuse me, who may think you're going to be struggling to go back to work, I'm going to be really bold and say, maybe you're in the wrong job if you're being forced into an office that doesn't give you those accommodations and sensitivities. You've got your rights, but I don't think it's about rights. It's about your heart. And if your heart's not right, your head's never going to be right either. I'm going to take us right back, Natasha, if I can. There's my rant over for now. Right back in the findings of the report, and we talk about, right at the end of our flyer, if you will, we talk about what is the call to action, what needs to change, and we've got some bullets here. Send the briefing note and the letter template to your local MP. We've discussed that, and we do need people to actually help us to help them. It's a cycle. Working on our own, we're going to get very few opportunities to influence change. But there's 300 odd people registered for this webinar. Imagine if all three of them over the next couple of days wrote to their MP and said, yeah, 300, yeah. Yeah, if all 300 wrote to their MP in the next 24, 48 hours, that's going to have an impact in Parliament, without a shadow of a doubt. So come on, guys, get this letter pulled down. Let's get on with it. Expand ADHD services and reduce waiting times. The immediate reaction to that, Natasha, is going to be that, well, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't do it. Your answer to that is, in a nutshell?
My answer to that in a nutshell is that they have a duty to do that. I think that also includes the shared care agreements, because actually that is one of the big challenges. People are getting the answers that they need and then basically being rejected for having the medication and the treatment that's going to help them. So I think we have to, as an NHS, as a country, we have to find a way to make that work. And whether or not that's being a bit more creative in how we deliver those ADHD services, or we kind of move it away from secondary care. There's probably a lot of reasons why it can't be away from secondary care or specialist providers, but we have to do something, because at the moment we are not serving people in the right way.
And if we stick with the commercial argument back to NHS, who say, the commissioner that says, we can't afford to do your second bullet to expand our ADHD services. If we stick to the commercial argument, the counter that comes out straight away is, actually, you can't afford not to, because Absolutely. This is going to cost you more money if you don't do it. And that's what we've proven in this paper. The paper was originally commissioned to satisfy a member of the House of Lords who wants to work with us, and has already gone to the House of Lords for his review. And it's a privilege to be asked by a Lord to give me the evidence to bring about ministers and make things change. So that, we're on the right pathway there. The third bullet, ensure the right to go on.
Sorry to cut across you, but just on that, this is not just a healthcare challenge. This is an economic challenge. And what we're saying is those services need to be expanded. We have integrated care systems that are made up of education, local authority, health, criminal justice system. This is a wide, broad problem that every single person should have a seat around the table to find how we make this work. This is not just about saying it's the NHS and its health. It's broader than that.
It is, absolutely. It's about society. I think over the years, Natasha, I've championed to the NHS, the cost of the criminal justice system. Those who know me, my policing background, the cost of the criminal justice system is billions. So spend more on the health system, and the health minister just goes, sod off. I'll only spend on the health system, thank you very much. And we've got this siloed government thinking where the health minister is arm wrestling with the justice minister and the education minister and the social services minister, social care minister, whatever. But what we've got in this paper is, right, Mr. and Mrs. NHS, we're bringing the argument to your doorstep that if you don't do this, it's going to cost you more money. Forget the rest of the argument they need to hear, the commissioners, is this is an argument on their doorstep, and we've made that case with an evidence base that is really strong. And you're right about this is not just a healthcare issue, but actually the commissioners who are making some appalling decisions at the moment need to bloody well hear this, that this is an economic argument they cannot walk away from. They just cannot, absolutely cannot afford to ignore this, which is why we're going to the House of Lords, which is why this is appearing on Wes Streeting's desk, which is why we're making a lot of noise about it. There's another bullet here, and it reinforces what I've just said. Fund ADHD diagnosis and treatment as an investment, not a cost. The economic benefits far outweigh the initial expenditure, and I think we've made that. I've made it quite emotionally, which is typically me. Yeah. But I am passionate about this. I really am. We should recognise ADHD's impact across education, employment, and the criminal justice system, and that's your wider point. And there is a financial implication there. But again, and I talk to my teams about this, we can have two discussion points here at the strategic level. We can talk about finances, or we can talk about people. And we should never talk about one without the other. So although this is a paper about the economic cost, it's also bringing forward, and you've done it ever so well, and I do take my hat off to you, the people cost as well as the financial cost. So an accountant will get excited about the numbers, but a human will get excited about the people side of this. And I would ask anybody to read them both together. And then we talk about implementing early intervention strategies to reduce the long-term economic burden. The GPs I was working with today were asking me, what could we do? You can screen every patient who is got a non-clinically responsive depression and anxiety in their adult life. You can screen every one of those for ADHD, asking 6 questions. For children, if they're getting excluded because of their behaviour, screen them for ADHD. It's not difficult to do. If a child's under detention for forgetting a pencil when they go to school, buy them a bloody pencil. Don't exclude them. And if it becomes a pattern, screen them for ADHD. There is so much that can be done that is straightforward, isn't there? So we're in the last 2 minutes now. Let's wrap up. Natasha, on behalf of our organisation, but certainly looking at the chat, I just want to congratulate you on an amazing piece of work. It puts UK research on the doorstep of those people that need to actually hear these messages. And I am not against making those people feel uncomfortable. In fact, I get quite excited by it. I think we have got a right, a privilege. We have got a role to play in making those people who are making poor decisions uncomfortable about the decisions they're making. So I genuinely applaud this report. It'll be on the website as soon as Kristen and the team can get it up there. You will enjoy reading it, and please use it wisely to assist a wider campaign to bring about change, because that's certainly what we're doing. I want to thank the people that have attended tonight's webinar, because you've embraced this, which is a very different argument to what we're used to putting forward here as an organisation of healthcare providers. But I think we've got a responsibility to work together. So I'm grateful for your coming. In all honesty, if it were just Natasha and I, it would have been pretty dull. So as a webinar with 100+ people, absolutely fantastic. And I hope you can take a lot from it, certainly reading the comments now, which Natasha, I'll get to you, but you can see the affirmation for a job well done, not only in the paper, but in tonight as well. To Kristen and the team that helped us pull this together, thank you ever so much as usual. The last question here, so passionate about it. Anne, thank you, you say. How can we add our voice to yours? Get this paper, get to your MP, and tell them to get their shit sorted, because that's where we're going to make a change. And thanks to everybody. Now we go through, as we close out now, we go through our usual routine. Natasha and I will want to have a 2-minute debrief on this. And Natasha will want, because she's ADHD and she struggles with emotional rejection dysphoria, she will want to know how she's done. And I'm going to tell her what a fantastic job she's done. But I'm not going to be able to do that as honestly as she'll want to hear it till you lot have buggered off. So I would say thank you very, very much. Please,
can I leave one final thought? Could I leave one final thought?
Oh, hang on. Here's some ADHD coming out.
Only just that I think every single person that is on here clearly has joined because they have a vested interest in this. And as Phil said, we're so grateful that everybody has come here. But the final thought that I wanted to leave everybody with is this isn't about people with undiagnosed ADHD or diagnosed ADHD trying harder or coping better. This is about giving them the access to that support that they deserve. And when we do that, everybody wins, not just people with neurodivergence, everybody.
Absolutely, and well said. Absolutely said. And I wish you all good night. Summer's on its way, and although I've said that from Manchester, where it's raining because it's Manchester, and it always seems to rain in Manchester, I would say good night. If you could log off, that leaves us free to just wind out. But thank you for attending, and the paper will be available, I would hope, tomorrow.
Thank you.